A major point of focus for Donald Trump's on-again, off-again tariff threats is the North American auto sector. Now, the most recent update is another 30-day pause, and that was a reversal from the U.S. president that came just 2 days after 25% tariffs did briefly come into effect last week. But we still have tariffs on steel and aluminum that are set to kick in later this week, and reciprocal tariffs for all countries that trade with the U.S. set to kick in April 2nd. So to help us make sense of all of this, we have David Adams joining in now, President and CEO of Global Automakers of Canada. David, it's good to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
It has been whiplash these past few weeks for all of us, but I can imagine certainly for automakers. This is, of course, a deeply integrated sector. We have cars and parts moving back and forth across the Canada-US border multiple times. What have the past couple of months been like for you and for your members?
Well, the tariff threat was really long-standing. I think everybody had anticipated perhaps a 10% tariff going back mid last year, but certainly 25%. All of the new tariffs that have been announced since President Trump was inaugurated are highly problematic, as you noted in your introduction. I think if we look at tariffs, they're essentially taxes, and it's contrary to what the president might espouse. They're taxes that are paid by American consumers in this case. And the other reality is that for vehicles that are built in Canada, quite a significant percentage of the parts and components that goes into those vehicles actually come from the United States. So you're doubly taxing your own economy through putting these measures in place. But to your point, it's been very difficult to keep up with the constant yo-yoing of whether the tariffs are on again or off again, and the rationale for the tariffs in the first place.
Like you said, the tariffs on steel and aluminum, it's a bit confusing because those are still set to go ahead right after the president said that, we're seeing this reprieve for the auto sector. Those are key raw materials for the sector. So help us understand what this uncertainty does to supply chains. Does it mean that orders that are already placed suddenly double in price? As a result, are we already seeing deliveries halted? What really is going on at the moment as this uncertainty persists?
Well, it's going to impact the auto parts sector perhaps slightly differently than the vehicle manufacturing sector. But the reality is that once these tariffs are in place, then they would be applied for goods crossing the border. I think the issue that may have given the president cause to reconsider the auto tariff is that he's really putting a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, which is primarily hindering, if you would call it, the North American auto industry, the Detroit automakers, at the same time when vehicles coming into the United States from other countries are paying a far lower tariff. So it makes absolute no sense. And I think that's what perhaps the president was finally convinced of. But, there are always consequences when you shoot first and aim later. And this seems to be, what we're dealing with these automotive tariffs.
Yeah, the premise here that Trump has is that he wants to move manufacturing to the U.S. We know that's difficult, but help us understand how difficult, because realistically, how long would that take? And does the U.S. even have the labor, have the workforce to move manufacturing there?
Well, let's start with your last point. The United States right now is pretty much in a situation of full employment. So if you're going to be transferring manufacturing there, you need a highly trained workforce to be able to work in those factories. Or the other option, I guess, is to automate those factories, but that repatriates the production, but does nothing for jobs. But you're right, this isn't a short-term proposition. Any repatriation of manufacturing would take years. We have billions of dollars of sunk capital investment in Canada, and the reality is that it's not only the vehicle manufacturers, but all of their parts and component suppliers. The whole new global supply chains or North American supply chains would have to be reworked, in addition to the labor component that you highlighted.
So your trade association, if I'm not wrong, represents about 16 large global automakers. What are you hearing from them? Because I'm trying to understand if there is a concern that global automakers could start thinking of shifting production away from Canada if we're talking about their longer-term planning.
Well, in my membership right now, I have two manufacturers that are building vehicles in Canada, Honda and Toyota. The remainder of my manufacturers, or members rather, manufacture around the world, but a lot of them are doing the manufacturing in the CUSMA region, which is the whole point of having a trade agreement, which is to provide duty-free access to the North American market, regardless of where you're produced. But I think the reality is that these tariffs are creating a lot of uncertainty, and any global manufacturer is going to have to look at what's in front of them at the moment and figure out what the best options are for producing and distributing vehicles around the world. I think the ultimate challenge, though, is or end game here should be just to get some certainty, because whether it's the automotive industry or any business, no business likes uncertainty. We have a construct with Canada USMCA, the CUSMA agreement, or the USMCA agreement rather, with the United States and Mexico, that the president himself negotiated less than 5 years ago, called it a perfect agreement. If there are issues with our trading relationship with the United States, that should be the construct in which we're dealing with these issues and challenges, not a continuing flurry of tariff announcements seemingly on a daily basis.
All right, David, we leave it there. Obviously, it's a continued period of uncertainty, and we'll continue to have to respond depending on what comes out of the White House. That is David Adams, Global Automakers of Canada, President and CEO. Appreciate your time today, David.
Thanks for having me.